Another exciting game here. We had several invasions in this game where groups came pretty close to dying, but in most cases managed to survive. White lived here in the bottom right pretty easily, but then when White invaded on the top, it was kind of a close call. And the final really crisis moment of this game came in the upper left, where White tried to save these white stones. White needed to either pull these stones out or pull this stone out here at C11, because otherwise Black just had way too much territory on the left side, as well as a little in the upper right, and White didn't have so much territory, especially considering all of Black's thickness here on the right side. So in the game, White chose to play this Kosumi at f15, but this move ended up being a little bit too slow and heavy. A lot of times we think of the tiger's mouth as being a pretty strong, flexible shape, but in a sabaki situation, it can actually be pretty slow, especially if you have to consider the peep, like this at e14. So Black did a good job of sort of falling back and playing here at g13. And after this, White tried to get out a little, but quickly realized that there was no way to save the stones, and so Black just had too much territory in the upper left. So how could White have played instead? So I would recommend playing a looser move that would maybe sacrifice some stones, but at least reduce Black to some degree. So the move I was looking at is, what about this attachment at f13? As we know, attachments are often a good way of making shape and causing a little chaos, and I think this is a good example of that. So how might Black react if we attach here? So Black could try, for example, this Hane. So we're going to not extend, but Hane ourselves. And so we're looking at either this Atari through at d13 or this cut here at e12. So Black will probably have to just connect, and then White can extend. And we can see that already this is a better result than in the game, where Black just ended up getting the whole thing with no Aji. Here we at least have some forcing stones, and if Black decides to cut, then White will get more forcing stones on the outside, and there still might be some Aji here with the push through at d11. Okay, but what if Black decides to play a little bit more aggressively and Hane's this way to keep all this territory? Well, in this case, we can just Hane ourselves. And so now Black is in a bit of a predicament, because if Black plays here to capture this c11 stone, then White can actually play some nice forcing moves like this to sacrifice a stone and push through, and then swallow up these two stones here on the left side. And I think that's a very good trade for White, especially considering that these stones were probably impossible to save by themselves. Alternatively, White could consider, after this, just Atarying this way and getting these forcing moves here on the outside, depending on what's more important. And you could actually still play, this variation if White wanted to. Like something like this. So I think this was White's last chance to turn the game around with some sabaki. Okay, so let's take a look back and see how this happened. So White chose to take the upper left here, which is fine. Often we'll see that professionals usually like to disrupt Black's formation here, especially with this wide Shamari. And there's a couple ways of doing that, even something as simple as this approach, and then either just playing back here or this standard double Hane Joseki are things to consider, just to break up this framework a little bit. So Black enclosed, or White enclosed, Black chose to expand. And so for even here, if I were White, I would probably just approach here. I mean, the corners are just bigger than the sides, and I would really play this 017 move and see how Black reacts. You could even consider this approach here to the bottom right, this approach to the Shamari, although I would probably play the upper right instead. So we don't see this two-space one so much, just because White has this kick here. It's probably a little bit more common. I mean, this move is fine. It's a little bit more common to see the three-space move, or even this one up here, just so that the kick at c4 isn't so good, because now it's kind of a thank you move for Black. And so often if white kicks here, black doesn't really want to extend here because then he'll end up pretty over-concentrated. So sometimes black will just speed down the side and kind of just treat this c5 stone as just a forcing exchange. So this move is fine. I might try to get into the corner a little bit, just because since black played this... So as black, I actually might have played a little bit tighter just to protect the corner a bit more, or even the ogema here, just to put a little more control over the corner. So since black didn't play there, as white, I might try to get into the corner a little bit. You could just invade directly and try to make this stone at m17 a little bit redundant. Maybe something like this. If you're concerned that this wall works too well with black's framework, then we could try something sort of in between. Like, for example, how about this attachment here at r16? I think that could be pretty good. If black plays from the inside, we could have a sequence like this. So black will still hold on to the corner, but white will have pushed in a little bit. And if black plays this way, then white can just hane on the inside and take the corner. So like this, black ended up with a pretty ideal corner formation here. I like this invasion. So I think there were actually a couple moves in the game like this that were kind of like these slides onto the second line. And I don't think these moves are so good. Often they're tempting to play because we feel like we're just wrecking the opponent's territory. But I really think we should just jump out here. This move just seems a lot cleaner. It's more focused towards the center of the board. It's just a more dynamic move. And it really more sets up a follow-up here at d10. Whereas this slide to the corner is more a defensive move, like we're just desperate to make life. And so this probe is fine, but as white, I might just try and punish black by playing on the top like this. Since black should have jumped, we can kind of take black's good move by just playing on the top at d13 and forcing black to live inside. But I think this probe is good. So white had a good response to hane here. But one key thing here is in the game, white chose to just live right away with this tripod formation. But I don't think that's exactly the idea of this probe. Usually we just want to see how black plays, and then we can kind of leave that aji for later. The idea is that we might continue by playing somewhere in the area, like for example, a move like this, which threatens to pull out the stones. And if black then chooses to lock down the corner, we can just jump out. We could also just play here and leave the corner for later, play here and leave the corner for later, something like that. The point is that now that we've played this exchange, white knows that white can always have this option to live in the corner later, so it's not necessarily so urgent right now. It's only move 25, and I think that's more of a middle game thing to decide to actually live here. Okay, so black then did choose to make this move here. So if we're going to play in the lower left, I would probably just play this kick. This would be sort of the standard sequence. But I would actually be more focused on looking after this triangled stone here, this C11 stone, just because black's follow-up that we saw in the game, the shoulder hit, is pretty severe. So I think we should just jump out like this. This looks good to me. And especially because if this sequence sort of continues, then later in the game we can be happy to make this exchange because now black can't speed down the side anymore because there's already a white stone here. So this sequence would become stronger for white later in the game, even though this corner move is big. So after black locks down this stone, I think the game is looking pretty good for black at this point. White stones, these 4 stones here, are pretty thin still, and black has a lot of stones surrounding, so when black cuts through, it's going to be maybe a tough fight for white. And white doesn't have much territory on the top, although this corner is big. So I think white really needs to find some way to fight here. So in the game, white took this second line move, kind of like what we were talking before, which I don't think is so big. So instead, what if we try to push out here? So if black hanes, I think we can just cut and be able to get some kind of decent result. So black really has two options. If black just extends from here, then white can just force down and sacrifice the stone in order to swallow up these two stones. And I think this would be a pretty good trade for white. So as a result, probably black can't play this way. Probably black has to play here, in which case white can push out this way, like this. So either way, white is going to get some helpful forcing moves. And unfortunately, white didn't get a chance to follow up in the game, but I think this is a perfect time to try and use some of the agi of this stone. Yeah, and these second line moves just aren't so urgent most of the time. So I like this move. I think it's a good time to live in the corner. So this double hane is the right idea. Probably we want to set up this hane here first. It's just so powerful to hane at both heads of two stones like this. And then even after this Atari, white still has these cutting points, so we'll have to fix with something like this. And black can get many forcing moves on the outside and then can start cutting white up. So instead of this, I think we really want to exchange one Atari first. And black will extend to deny white good eye shape in the corner. So then we don't want to take the stone like this. We then want to come back with this. And if white captures, then we can jump out. So compare this to the game result. So in both situations, white got out, but in this variation, white got a lot more into the corner because white played this Atari here at S19. Whereas in the actual game, black took the whole corner. So it's a pretty big difference in points and in eye space. So I think this cut is good here, but white is just a little thin on the outside. So I think this was actually a good opportunity for black to actually just push through this way. This seems like the simplest way to start cutting up white's shape. And now we can just connect. And so white basically has two places to protect these two triangled points, and it's kind of mi. So whichever one white protects, black can push through the other one. So for example, if white protects here, black can just push out this way, and we can see that white's shape is just going to fall apart like this. And if white protects here, then black can just push out this way. And either way, white's going to have some problems, so I think black should just push out. So this is another chance where I feel like white played some heavy moves in this game. So this is a good example of white should definitely just cut here. So white needs to cause some chaos here to try and settle his stone since black has so much strength. And I think this is another one of the opportunities, sort of like the stone at C11, where white could have sacrificed some stones to get a good result. So what if we just push through here and sacrifice these stones? So this looks pretty good to me because black would be very over-concentrated in the upper right, and white would become very thick on the outside, and would maybe get a chance to follow up around Q8. Or, if black were to protect, then white can finally shut down this black stone here. Or maybe in more of a dynamic way like this. So I think white could have considered cutting and pushing through to sacrifice. So now the slide is good, although white could also consider maybe this double hane, attach and double hane. And so again here, when black attaches, white played in a bit of a heavy way. So what if instead we just hane here and take the stone? So this would be the same idea of sacrificing these stones and taking something on the outside. Black is so strong here that we're actually in a way almost happy to sacrifice these stones. We kind of almost want black to capture them to make black over-concentrated. So in this situation, I think it'd be good for white to think of that kind of a result of probably sacrificing to making black over-concentrated. So after this, though, it becomes pretty tough for white because white is just totally surrounded here, and now black can just make all these forcing moves on white and become very thick on the outside, and so this is what we saw here. So black did a good job with these forcing moves, and then black played a great move here at L16 to take advantage of white's weakness, and this became very hard for white to handle at this point. So white turned over here, which I think is a good move. And so white did double Hane, but then we maybe, well, I see. So white did get this forcing move to live. Actually, maybe black could have just Hane'd here. That looks pretty good. I don't know if, probably white couldn't really cut here. But this is good enough. White jumped out. And then this got to be what I was talking about at the beginning of the lesson, where white should have found a looser move here to try and sacrifice. So we really saw a couple instances of it. So this was 1, maybe this was 2, and this was 3. So a couple opportunities where white should have played a little bit more loosely and tried to sacrifice a stone and tried to over-concentrate black. I would say that black was a little too focused maybe on these second line moves, like for example, where black slid to the second line here. And these second line moves just aren't so big. So I think those were the main takeaways. Oh, and also how instead of this double Hane, black should have Hane'd here to Hane at both heads of the two stones. So I think those are the main takeaways from this game. So in the end, black just had too much territory here on the upper left after this, and black was able to win this game. So I hope this review was helpful, and please let me know if you have any questions.